The cold wind howled through the nearly deserted streets as Officer Emily Carter adjusted her patrol cap, her boots crunching softly against the gravel-strewn sidewalk. It was another long night shift, the kind that stretched endlessly in the quiet town of Willow Creek. But something about the night felt different, an eerie stillness that sent a shiver down her spine. She had just finished checking in at the 24-hour diner, exchanging small talk with the weary waitress when she heard it, the soft but insistent sound of paws against the pavement. Turning, Emily's eyes widened as she saw a dog limping toward her, its dark eyes filled with urgency. The animal, a scruffy golden retriever mix, was thin and ragged, its fur matted with dirt and dried leaves. But despite its condition, the dog exuded an undeniable determination. It wasn't unusual to see strays wandering the streets, but something about this one struck her as different. The dog didn't hesitate, didn't stop to sniff or search for food. It had a purpose, and it had chosen her. Emily crouched down, offering her hand in a gesture of reassurance. "Hey there, girl," she murmured, noting the faint tremor in the dog's body. "Where did you come from?" Instead of responding with fear or hesitation, the dog nudged her hand once before turning, taking a few steps forward, then stopping. Looking back, waiting, Emily straightened, her pulse quickening. She had seen this kind of behavior before. The dog wasn't lost. It wasn't looking for food. It was leading her somewhere. The realization sent a ripple of unease through her, but she didn't hesitate. With one last glance at the empty street behind her, she followed. The dog's pace quickened, its tail flicking anxiously as it weaved through alleys and back streets. Emily kept up, her flashlight cutting through the darkness, her breath visible in the crisp air. Minutes stretched as she followed the animal, each step increasing the weight of the unknown pressing against her chest. Then suddenly the dog stopped. Emily nearly stumbled as she caught up, her heartbeat hammering against her ribs. Ahead, in the dim glow of a flickering street lamp, she saw it, something that made the breath catch in her throat. A small, crumpled figure lay motionless beneath a rusted metal staircase. Emily's instincts kicked in before her mind could catch up. She rushed forward, dropping to her knees beside the figure, a child no older than 5, shivering in the freezing night air. His face was pale, his lips tinged blue. He barely stirred as Emily pressed 2 fingers to his neck, relief flooding through her when she found a faint but steady pulse. Tears stung her eyes as she turned to the dog, who stood close, watching her expectantly. That's when she saw it, wrapped around the dog's tattered collar, a tiny fabric scrap with smudged, hastily scrawled words. "Help him." Emily's breath hitched. Someone had sent this dog, someone who, in their darkest moment, had trusted this animal to find help. And somehow, against all odds, it had found her. Her radio crackled as she called for an ambulance, her voice thick with emotion. As sirens wailed in the distance, she reached out, running a trembling hand over the dog's dirt-streaked fur. "You're a hero," she whispered. And for the first time that night, the dog wagged its tail. The wailing sirens grew louder as Emily knelt beside the unconscious child, her hands trembling as she gently brushed away strands of hair from his forehead. His skin was ice cold, his small frame barely rising with each shallow breath. The boy couldn't have been out here long, an hour, maybe 2, but in the bitter cold of the night, it had been enough to push him to the brink. The dog sat beside her, its deep brown eyes fixed on the boy as if willing him to wake up. Emily looked at the scrap of fabric again, the hastily scribbled plea for help tugging at something deep in her chest. Who had sent this dog? And why had they left a child alone in the night? The ambulance screeched to a stop nearby, its red and blue lights flashing against the surrounding buildings. 2 paramedics rushed toward them, their boots thudding against the pavement. "He's freezing," Emily said as one of them, a burly man with graying hair, checked the boy's pulse. "I don't know how long he's been out here." The other paramedic, a younger woman, unzipped a thermal blanket and wrapped it around the child's fragile frame. "His vitals are weak, but he's alive," she said, relief evident in her voice. "We need to get him to the hospital, fast." As they loaded the child onto the stretcher, Emily turned her attention back to the dog, who had taken a step closer as if to make sure the boy was in good hands. "I'm not letting you out of my sight," she murmured, reaching for her radio. "I need backup on my location. This wasn't an accident." A gut feeling told her that whoever had left that note hadn't just abandoned the boy. There was something more at play here, something that made her stomach twist uncomfortably. As the ambulance doors slammed shut and the vehicle sped off toward Willow Creek General Hospital, Emily turned to the dog. "Show me," she said. The dog hesitated only for a second before turning sharply and breaking into a sprint. Emily followed without question, her pulse pounding in her ears. They weaved through narrow alleys and across silent streets, the dog never once hesitating in its path. Then, just when Emily thought she'd lost track of where they were, they stopped in front of an old, decrepit building on the outskirts of town. It was a rundown motel, long abandoned and half forgotten. The windows were shattered, graffiti covered the walls, and the neon sign flickered weakly, barely illuminating the cracked pavement below. Emily's breath caught in her throat. A sound low and muffled came from inside. A whimper. The dog's ears perked up, and it let out a low whine before taking a step forward. Emily reached for her gun. Someone was inside, and judging by the dog's desperate insistence, they needed help. She pushed open the rusted door, the hinges creaking loudly in the silence. The interior was even worse than the exterior, dust-covered furniture, broken bottles littering the floor, the stench of mildew thick in the air. Then another noise, a soft sob. Emily's grip tightened on her gun as she moved toward the sound, her heart hammering in her chest. The dog darted ahead, slipping through a doorway into one of the rooms. Emily followed, then stopped cold. Curled up on the floor, barely visible in the dim light, was a young woman clutching her stomach. Her clothes were torn, her face streaked with dirt and dried blood. Her eyes, wide and terrified, locked onto Emily's. "Help!" she rasped, her voice hoarse and broken. Emily rushed forward, holstering her weapon. "I've got you," she said, dropping to her knees beside the woman. "You're safe now." Tears welled in the woman's eyes as she shakily reached for the dog, running a trembling hand through its fur. She found you?" Emily nodded. "She led me right to you." The woman let out a choked sob, clinging to the dog as if it were her lifeline. "What happened?" Emily asked gently, glancing around the dimly lit room. The woman swallowed hard. "My son," she whispered. "Is he?" Emily's heart clenched. "He's safe." An ambulance took him to the hospital. The woman's face crumpled in relief, and fresh tears spilled down her cheeks. I left the note," she said, her voice shaking. "I didn't know what else to do. They were coming back, and I had to make sure he got out. She was my only hope." Emily looked down at the dog, realization dawning on her. This dog wasn't just a stray. She was a protector, and she had done exactly what she was meant to do. The woman trembled as she spoke, her words coming in rushed fragments. "They kept us here for days. I don't even know how long. I thought." She shook her head violently, squeezing her eyes shut. "I thought they were going to kill us." Emily's blood ran cold. "Who?" But before the woman could answer, a noise echoed from the hallway. Heavy footsteps. Emily's hand flew back to her gun as the dog let out a low growl. They weren't alone, and whoever was coming wasn't here to help. Emily's pulse thundered in her ears as the heavy footsteps grew closer. The dim motel room felt even smaller, the air thick with tension. The woman clutched the dog's fur, her eyes wide with fear. "Stay quiet," Emily whispered, inching toward the door with her gun raised. The dog let out a low, rumbling growl, ears pinned back, every muscle in its body tensed. A shadow stretched across the floor just outside the room. Then the doorknob turned. Instinct took over. Emily lunged forward, kicking the door as it swung open. It slammed into a tall man dressed in dark, weathered clothing. He staggered back, cursing before regaining his footing. His eyes, cold and calculating, locked onto Emily's. Well, he sneered, rubbing his shoulder where the door had hit him. "Didn't expect company. Hands where I can see them," Emily commanded, keeping her gun steady. The man scoffed, but raised his hand slightly. "You don't understand what's going on here, officer." His voice was smooth, unsettling. "You're sticking your nose where it doesn't belong." Emily's stomach churned. She recognized his type. Dangerous, manipulative, the kind who never expected to get caught. But before she could respond, the dog sprang into action. With a deep, guttural snarl, it lunged, its powerful jaws clamping down on the man's forearm. He screamed, staggering back as the dog refused to let go. "Damn mutt," he bellowed, struggling to shake the animal off. Emily seized the opening, rushing forward and twisting his free arm behind his back. The man howled in pain, but Emily didn't loosen her grip. She slammed him against the wall, pressing her knee into his back as she yanked out her handcuffs. "Tell me what the hell is going on here," she demanded, snapping the cuffs onto his wrists. "Who else is involved?" The man chuckled darkly despite his position. "You have no idea what you're dealing with." Emily's gut tightened. She glanced at the woman, who was still huddled in the corner, her hands pressed over her mouth. The dog backed away, its chest rising and falling rapidly, fur bristling. "You should listen to him." A new voice echoed from the hallway. Emily stiffened. More footsteps. Then, two more men stepped into view. Unlike the first man, they were better dressed, leather jackets, clean-shaven, the type who looked like they could blend into normal society. But their eyes gave them away. Cold, soulless. The taller of the two smirked. Now, this is a problem. Emily's grip tightened on her gun. She was outnumbered. She could take one, maybe two, but three? The dog let out another deep growl, standing protectively in front of the woman. Emily had no doubt that the animal would fight to the death if necessary. She needed a plan. Fast. "You have two choices," the taller man continued, stepping forward. "You walk away, pretend you never saw any of this, and we all go about our business. Or," he tilted his head, "you make things difficult." Emily's jaw clenched. She wasn't walking away. She had come this far, and she wasn't leaving without answers. Then, something happened that made the hairs on the back of her neck stand up. The dog did something she had never seen before. It stared at the men, its deep brown eyes locking onto each of them in turn. And then, slowly, deliberately, it stepped forward and let out a low, almost human-like whimper. The air shifted. Emily felt it. The men did too. The first man, still pinned under her knee, stopped struggling. His breathing became shallow, his face pale. "What the hell?" one of the others muttered, stepping back. Emily frowned, gripping her gun tighter. The dog wasn't growling anymore. It was watching them, studying them. Then, as if answering some unseen command, it took another step forward, closer to the second man. The moment its eyes locked onto his, he stumbled backward, his face draining of color. "No," he rasped. "No way. That's not possible." Emily glanced at the dog, her heart pounding. What was happening? The man shook his head violently, his breaths coming fast. "I'm not doing this again." Without another word, he turned and bolted. Emily barely had time to process before the second man followed, cursing under his breath as he disappeared down the hallway. The only one left was the man under Emily's knee. He was shaking. "Dublich, what is that thing?" he whispered, eyes darting toward the dog. Emily's skin prickled. She looked at the animal, its golden fur glowing faintly under the dim motel lights. Its ears were alert, eyes locked onto the man like it could see through him, see something Emily couldn't. She had seen dogs display intelligence, loyalty, even bravery. But this was something else, something deeper, something unexplainable. She tightened her grip on the man. "You're going to tell me everything," she said, her voice low, steady. "Or I'll let her look at you again." The man let out a strangled gasp, his eyes darting wildly. Okay, he sputtered. "Just get it away from me." Emily didn't move. The dog didn't either. And for the first time that night, she realized this wasn't just a rescue. It was a reckoning. And whatever this dog was, it had chosen her to help deliver it. The air inside the dilapidated motel room felt electric, charged with something Emily couldn't explain. The man beneath her grip was trembling, his breath coming in shallow gasps, his eyes flicking wildly between her and the dog. The dog. Emily had seen bravery in animals before, loyalty, instinct, even intelligence that surpassed human expectations. But this was something more, something deeper. It had chased away two hardened criminals with nothing more than a look. And now, the man she had pinned beneath her was unraveling like he was staring into the face of something far greater than just an ordinary stray. Emily pressed down harder on his cuffed wrists. "You're going to start talking," she ordered, voice sharp as steel. "Who are you working for? Why was that woman and her child locked in here?" The man swallowed hard, sweat beading on his forehead despite the cold. "You don't get it," he rasped. "You think you're saving them?" His eyes flicked toward the dog again. "You have no idea what you just let loose." Emily's blood ran cold. The woman, still huddled in the corner, let out a sharp breath. "It's them," she whispered. "They're the ones who took us." Emily's grip on her gun tightened. "What?" The woman's eyes darted to the dog, then back to Emily. "Because of her." Emily glanced at the golden retriever mix standing between them, chest heaving, eyes locked on the man with an eerie intensity. The woman swallowed hard. "They weren't after me," she murmured. "They were after her." Emily's mind reeled. "The dog." The man let out a hoarse laugh. "You have no idea what you're dealing with, officer." He inhaled sharply. "That thing? That's no ordinary animal." The dog took a step forward. The man flinched. Emily felt something shift again, like an unseen force in the room pressing in, thick and unrelenting. The woman wiped at the tear-streaked dirt on her face, her voice trembling. "I found her a few weeks ago, wandering near my house. She was injured, starving. I took her in." She reached out, fingers trembling, and the dog licked her hand gently, a small comfort. "I thought she was just another stray." But then, her breath hitched. Things started happening. Emily waited, her heart pounding. "What things?" The woman exhaled shakily. At first, it was small. She always seemed to know when something bad was coming, like she could sense danger before it happened. "One night, she woke me up minutes before my house was broken into. I managed to hide with my son, just in time." She shuddered. "Then, I started noticing other things. She would stare at people, really stare at them, and they'd get nervous, like she was seeing something they didn't want to be seen." Emily's skin prickled. "I tried to ignore it," the woman continued. "But then they came." She shot a look at the man on the floor. "They broke into my house in the middle of the night. Said they were looking for her." The dog let out a soft growl, eyes never leaving the man. Emily pressed the barrel of her gun harder against his back. "Why?" The man gritted his teeth. "Because she's not normal," he hissed. "She sees things." Emily's breath hitched. "Sees what?" The man swallowed hard. "The truth." Silence fell over the room. The dog's ears twitched, her steady gaze locked onto him. And then, slowly, she took another step forward. The man shuddered violently, squeezing his eyes shut. "No," he gasped. "Keep it away." Emily looked at the dog again, something dawning in her mind. The way the criminals had reacted. The way the man beneath her was trembling. The way the woman had described the dog's presence. Her ability to see something in people. Emily had spent years in law enforcement, staring into the eyes of criminals, chasing down liars, manipulators, men who hid the worst parts of themselves beneath layers of charm and deception. But this dog didn't need years of training. She simply knew. A truth seeker, a judge, and for those who carried darkness inside them, she was something far worse than a weapon. She was their reckoning. Emily looked down at the man, whose body had begun to shake uncontrollably. "What is she showing you?" she asked, her voice deadly calm. The man's breath came in short, ragged gasps. I see it." His face twisted in horror. No, it wasn't my fault. I didn't have a choice." Emily's stomach turned. He wasn't talking to her anymore. He was talking to something else. The dog didn't move, her eyes locked onto his, unblinking. Then, with a strangled sob, the man collapsed, body limp, mouth open in silent terror. Emily yanked her hands back instinctively. "What the hell?" She pressed her fingers to his neck. His pulse was racing, but he was out cold. The woman let out a slow breath. She did it again. Emily stared at the dog. The golden retriever mix sat there, calm as ever, tail flicking slightly, eyes now warm and gentle. Like nothing had happened. like she hadn't just unraveled a man from the inside out. Sirens wailed in the distance. Backup, finally responding to her earlier call. Emily exhaled, forcing herself to focus. The men who had fled were still out there, and she had a survivor to protect. She couldn't afford to get lost in the mystery, at least, not yet. She holstered her gun and reached for her radio. "This is Officer Carter. I have one suspect detained in a possible case of human trafficking or organized crime. Request immediate assistance." A crackle of static, then, "Copy that. Units en route." Emily turned to the woman. "You and your son. We'll get you somewhere safe." Tears welled in the woman's eyes. "Thank you." As the sound of approaching vehicles grew louder, Emily finally crouched down beside the dog, running a hand over her scruffy fur. "You knew exactly what you were doing, didn't you?" she murmured. The dog wagged her tail once, slow and deliberate. Emily's throat tightened. She didn't know what this dog was. A survivor? A protector? Something more? But one thing was certain. This dog had saved lives tonight. And as Emily looked into those knowing brown eyes, she couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning. The chaos of the night slowly faded as flashing red and blue lights bathed the empty streets. Officers moved swiftly, securing the area, speaking to the woman, and loading the unconscious man into the back of a police cruiser. The crime scene technicians would comb through the motel for evidence, and detectives would begin piecing together the larger picture. But Emily Carter barely heard any of it. She stood off to the side, watching as paramedics checked over the woman one last time before preparing to transport her to the hospital, where her son was waiting. The boy had survived, and now, with his mother found, they had a chance to heal. And it was all because of the dog. The golden retriever Mix sat beside Emily, tail curled neatly around her paws, watching everything with quiet focus. She wasn't looking for affection, wasn't seeking praise. She simply observed, her gaze steady and knowing. Emily knelt beside her, running a gentle hand over her fur. "You saved them," she murmured. "You knew what was happening before anyone else did." The dog simply blinked, as if to say, "Of course I did." Emily exhaled, overwhelmed by the weight of what had happened. She had always believed in instinct. She trusted her gut in high-risk situations, relied on years of training and experience to read people, to sense danger. But this dog? She had something far beyond instinct. She could see what people carried inside them, the weight of their guilt, the darkness of their actions, the intentions they tried to hide. And for those who meant harm, she was something they feared beyond comprehension. Emily thought of the man who had collapsed in terror, of the criminals who had fled at just a glance from her. She had seen hardened criminals break under pressure, but nothing like that. They weren't afraid of getting caught. They were afraid of being seen. Emily stroked the dog's fur. "Who are you, really?" she whispered. The dog tilted her head slightly before pressing her nose gently against Emily's hand. It was a simple gesture, yet it held something profound. A choice. A connection. Emily swallowed hard. She knew what she had to do. She stood, glancing toward her fellow officers, then back at the dog. "She's coming with me," she said firmly. The officer nearest to her, Sergeant Davis, raised a brow. "Animal control can. She's not going to the shelter." Emily's tone left no room for argument. "She's mine now." Davis studied her for a moment, then nodded. "I don't think anyone would argue with that, Carter." Emily looked down at the dog, who was now staring up at her, tail wagging just slightly. It was decided. She had found her. Or maybe the dog had found her. The next morning, Emily sat on her small porch, sipping coffee as the early sun stretched across the sky. The town was waking up, cars rumbling down the street, the world moving forward like it always did. But everything felt different. At her feet, the golden retriever lay stretched out, her fur golden in the morning light. It had taken some convincing to get her into the car the night before, but once she had, she curled up in the passenger seat like she had always belonged there. Emily had spent most of the night replaying the events in her mind. The terror in the criminal's eyes. The way the woman had spoken about the dog's strange abilities. The way Emily felt when she looked into those deep brown eyes, like she was being seen in a way no one else ever had. She glanced down at the dog. "You need a name." The dog lifted her head slightly, ears perking up. Emily thought for a moment. How about Justice? The dog blinked slowly. No. Too dramatic? Emily smirked. All right, what about Sage? The dog tilted her head, considering. Emily chuckled. Yeah, that fits. You do seem wise beyond your years. Sage let out a small huff of approval before resting her head on Emily's foot. Emily reached down, running her fingers through the dog's soft fur. She had spent her career chasing down criminals, uncovering lies, piecing together the truth one case at a time. But last night had changed something in her. She had always thought justice came through hard evidence, careful deduction, and years of experience. But maybe the truth had always been simpler. Maybe it was something instinctual, something that couldn't be hidden behind lies and deception. Maybe it had 4 legs, soft golden fur, and eyes that could see into the deepest parts of the soul. Emily finished the last sip of her coffee, looking out at the horizon. She didn't know why Sage had found her. She didn't know how the dog did what she did. But she knew one thing for sure. Wherever the next case led, whatever truth needed uncovering, they would face it together, and the world would never be the same. Message: the power of truth and unseen heroes. This story is more than just a tale of rescue. It's about the unseen forces that guide us, the instincts we sometimes ignore, and the extraordinary bonds we form when we open our hearts to the unknown. Sage was more than a dog. She was a guardian, a seeker of truth, a protector of the innocent. In a world filled with deception, cruelty, and fear, she reminded those she encountered that the truth always finds a way to be seen. And sometimes, it comes in the form of a stray dog with a heart too big for this world. A hero without a voice, but with a message louder than words. And for those who carry darkness in their souls, she is their reckoning.